Hello everyone, and welcome back to another individual album review, one that I've been planning for a while now and I'm incredibly late to. The newest album from Death Cab for Cutie, I Built You a Tower. Yeah, so to be totally honest, the reason I'm so late to this is because I've been prioritizing my mini reviews, and also I've just been busy in my personal life, and thus I never really found the time to dedicate to individual album reviews. I'm hoping that'll change soon. I've got 3 throwback reviews that I would love to publish by the end of August, fingers crossed. But I figured I should eventually try and get these reviews done because some of them I've been planning for a while, including this one. And, I mean, this isn't the only individual album review I have planned for a new album. Now, it's worth mentioning that I did actually talk about Death Cab for Cutie on this channel earlier this year when I did a throwback review of Narrow Stairs, their 2008 album, which I think might just be the weakest in their discography, or at least one of them. I went through their full discography at the time, and I decided to revisit all of their albums back in June when I was planning on posting this video. And unfortunately, Narrow Stairs still isn't any good. But what might surprise you more is that my favorite Death Cab for Cutie album actually isn't Transatlanticism. That's my second favorite behind 2005's Plans, which had some of their most emotional writing and some of their most crushing guitar and drum passages, not in terms of being musically heavy, rather being super well crafted, that sort of crushing. Transatlanticism is actually their best album, and it's not even close. Well, I don't give a fuck what Nomis says. Plans is my favorite Death Cab for Cutie album. It's not one that I've listened to long enough to really fully have a ton more to say about it right now, but it is the one that I like the most out of those, and one that I'm definitely intrigued to revisit more and more. But that album was over 2 decades ago, and I don't think they've made a great album since then. And while I was way too negative in my 2022 mini review of Asphalt Meadows that I wrote on my blog, I still don't think that album was anything particularly special, even though a 4 out of 10 was way too low. I'd say it's probably a 6. Honestly, there's a lot of old reviews on my blog that I do not agree with nowadays. But anyway, I was still kind of curious about I Built You a Tower. I didn't have super high expectations, but I have liked a lot of this band's material overall, and even their underwhelming albums often have some strong standout tracks, so maybe this could be good, or at least interesting. And alright, let's get into talking about the songs. The album opens with the song Full of Stars, which is a pretty mellow acoustic folk song with some pianos and other keyboards that increase in volume a bit throughout the track, before the drums and electric guitars eventually come in toward the end. And I quite like the lyrics on this song about constantly wanting more from life, where this other person involved is misunderstanding the narrator's intentions, where Ben Gibbard sings about just wanting this person to be kind, but this person clearly doesn't care about that. And I think the musical payoff is quite worth the wait on this song, which isn't even that long a track overall. And while I sort of wonder what it might have been like if this exploded musically a bit more, I think it's fitting as is because the narrator never finds that proper resolution. I guess just instead learning to accept this other person's lack of care, or at least it seems that way on the surface. I guess we'll get into more throughout the album why maybe there's more going on here. But either way, it makes for a pretty heartbreaking ending to this song. And yeah, this is a really strong album opener. Punching the Flowers, on the other hand, is more of a stereotypical blazing indie rock song, with some honestly kind of obnoxious snares and a real lack of musical firepower, which leaves this one a lot more underwhelming musically than the first song. Now, unlike the first track, this song doesn't have a distinct narrator in the story, which talks about a relationship in which one person has severe mental health problems. And yet, I unfortunately don't find the writing all that unique or interesting, and musically it just sounds like the Ghosts of Beverly Drive, except not nearly as strong or interesting. Now, Pep Talk is very much an alt-rock song as well, but with a slower tempo and a more laid-back sound. It's probably better for it, even though the snare once again doesn't sound very good in my opinion. I think there's a bit more of an emotional appeal to this one because the narrator is actually in the story, which sort of makes up for the once again lack of super memorable writing and these lyrics about mental health. Although I don't know whether or not this is a personal song for any members of the band, and if it is, then I don't mean any disrespect by saying that. Some people might really resonate with this, but I personally just don't find it super memorable. That's all. Still a pretty good song. Then we get the first of 2 title tracks, where the idea of building a tower calls back to the building of a figurative wall that the narrator was accused of building on the first song on this record. And I don't love this song, this first title track, even though the drum production is cleaned up here. But I think it's interesting how the narrator is now admitting to wanting to keep this person contained, but what exactly that means is really open to interpretation. Based on the opening track, it seems like both characters disagree on who was in the right. Or I guess based on the opening track and this track and the overall narrative that's going on throughout this album. Envy the Birds is definitely a highlight on this album, despite being pretty simple in the narrative where he just wants an escape from the arguing. But man, those guitars and pummeling drums sound great, and the chorus is very catchy as well. I don't really have that much to say about this one, but it's easily one of the standout tracks here, and I'm really loving this one. I also very much appreciate the writing on the next track, Stone Over Water, which seems to be about not knowing when to be vulnerable and when to just try and put on an act. I just wish the music was more interesting. There's just not really much going for this outside of the lyrics to really make me care about it. It's hard to explain, but it just sounds so drab and uninteresting, not in a way that would really fit the lyrical content either. Although I guess the hint of guitar distortion and the small musical build toward the end was kind of interesting, but it's very brief. Then track 7 is How Heavenly a State, which right from the opening few seconds presents a very different vibe from the rest of this album, and then goes into a pummeling, almost post-punk groove, and the music on this one is pretty kick-ass, but I wish Ben Gibbard brought more intensity to this song. Although the lyrics are kind of haunting, with lines about someone being pulled by death to basically collapse under its weight. It is one of the better songs on the album. I just wish the vocals were a bit more interesting, that's all. Ben is often a really good singer, but this song just isn't really the right kind of vibe for him. At least I wish he was better at this vibe with his vocals. I feel like in a lot of songs, he's just very casual about the way that he sings without really bringing more intensity to fit with the music. Narratively, the next song, Trapdoor, feels like another important moment on this album, where the narrator starts to see the similarities between these two characters, and I quite like the elegant piano that shows up on this one. It's a nice, breezy, pretty song that I quite like, even if it's not one of my all-time favorite Death Cab songs. Now, I do find it kind of heartbreakingly funny at the start of the next song, Riptides, where he sings about feeling like a border guard after each breakup because they watch people leave all the time. And it really goes to some dark places of self-awareness while also feeling like these problems are unsolvable, a fatal flaw in his heart's design. And honestly, it's a pretty great song that I'd say is among the album's best. I mean, it's got all the makings of a great alt-rock song musically, and the lyrics just make it better, even if there's still a part of me that feels like this should be hitting harder, and I'm not sure why. I do still like this track quite a bit, though. Now, unfortunately, the penultimate track feels like a pretty bland song designed for alternative radio, and while I can appreciate how it continues with the themes of trying to escape some seemingly eternal mental funk or depression, it doesn't really feel like it continues the narrative without saying things that the album has already said earlier. And as a standalone song, I just don't find it compelling. Again, if you get something out of it, I won't judge or anything. I just personally have no reason to listen to this, and I honestly think it's one of the weaker tracks vocally. Then the closing track is the other of the two title tracks, and it's a lot heavier musically than the other title track, but it uses the same lyrics until later on in this track where he talks about trying to mentally move on from this person, but also how difficult it is. And when he talks about thinking that he could keep this person locked away, it again poses the question of what he means by that. And really, what happened overall? Musically, I think this is a pretty good song, although not one of the album's best highlights. But honestly, I quite like how unclear the story throughout the album is, especially because we mainly just see the one perspective, and the narrator doesn't seem to be shying away from letting us know that there is another side to the story. Now, I have no idea if this is about Ben Gibbard's divorce a few years ago or not. My guess would be that it likely is, but I'm not going to make assumptions. But if it's not, then maybe a sequel album would be interesting, showing another perspective. Either way though, I enjoyed this album quite a bit, not only for the fascinating narrative throughout it, but also because the music is pretty strong too. I don't always love the vocals, and I do think the narrative sometimes goes a bit astray, or maybe a better way to put it is that there's moments that don't really move this forward, more stagnant I guess. But the songs are mostly quite good, and I think this is probably my favorite Death Cab for Cutie album since, honestly, I'd say over 2 decades ago. It's got a couple great highlights on it, and only a few duds, with most of this being pretty damn solid. So yeah, I know this one took a while for me to actually get around to reviewing, but I have been listening to it off and on for the past few months since it came out, and I have liked a decent amount of Death Cab for Cutie's music in the past few decades, but it's usually just more in terms of individual songs than albums. In this case, with this album, I would easily give this a 7 out of 10. Not their best album ever, but it is a return to form that I am more than happy that we finally got and that I can talk about it. And I'm glad I'm finally getting around to reviewing this now, even if I didn't have a ton to say about it. Hopefully this makes up for my not so positive throwback review that I did earlier this year of Narrow Stairs. But either way, this is a really good album. Again, I'm not going to say it's super amazingly consistent all the way through, but again, it's got some great standouts on it, and I very much did enjoy this album overall, and I think it all goes together quite well as a fairly cohesive album experience. Again, it's not one of my favorites of the year, but it's still pretty damn solid, and again, I think it's their best album since Plans. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think of this album and or what you thought of my review. I'm curious to hear some other opinions on this one. Again, I think this is their best album in a while. I really like a lot of what they were doing here. I think narratively it's very interesting how it shows that there's, like, it really only shows one side mainly, but it kind of implies there's another side and there's more going on, and it's just really, really interesting. And I really like a lot of the music on this album too. Anyway, I'm not exactly sure when I'm going to get around to posting those throwback reviews, but I'm planning on hopefully doing that soon. No promises, but I do have quite a few of those planned. 3 that I'm hoping to be able to publish this month. Ideally, we'll see whether or not I get around to doing that. But anyway, I finally got this review out of the way, so that's good at least. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I will see you all soon.